everybody to the IBD podcast, past, present and future. So I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome Katherine Smart. Now, Katherine, as I'm sure lots of you know, is an absolute trailblazer for the industry. She's a scientist, a lecturer and a leader, and most recently she was appointed Master of the Worshipful Company of Brewers. Now, Katherine graduated from the University of Nottingham in 1987, where she read biological sciences. She has a PhD in brewing science from the Council of National Academic Awards, a DSc in brewing and distilling from the University of Nottingham, and an honorary Doctorate of Laws from the University of Nottingham. She also holds IBD Diploma in Distilling and has completed courses in sustainability from the Universities of Cambridge and Oxford. She has held academic positions at the Universities of Oxford Brookes, Nottingham, and is currently at Cambridge. Now, in her corporate life, she has held corporate vice president positions at SAB Miller and AB InBev, where she was the global chief brewer. And she is currently the global technical director and chief scientist at Diageo, responsible for innovation, research, and liquid development, packaging, and governance. She founded the National Brewing Library at the Oxford Brookes University and the Brewing Science and Bioenergy Centre at the University of Nottingham. And she also found time to found a family distillery with her husband, Dr. Chris Smart, in 2017. She was the second woman to hold the role of president of the Institute of Brewing and Distilling, 2016-18, and is the current president-elect of the American Society of Brewing Chemists. She's a rectifier of the Gin Guild, a liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Distillers, and has held board positions within IBD, the American Society of Brewing Chemists, and the Scottish Whisky Research Institute. She's also a member of the EBC Brewing Science Group. So, Katherine, I'll catch my breath and welcome to the kind of IBD podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So no, it's lovely to have you along here. So as we just kind of referenced, you're a teacher, you're a scientist, you're also a kind of business leader. What are the key themes that hold all of that together?
So I think for me, it's really super straightforward. I absolutely fell in love with the science of brewing and later the science of distilling as well. And really that's been the core driver throughout my career. I simply really find fascinating the processes, yeast cells in particular, but the processes that actually we use in order to make the most amazing beverages. And so for me, it's absolutely about the science.
And you've got that kind of unique, well, I'm not sure if it is unique, but that combination of being applying that science within a very practical context. So currently you're the global technology director and chief scientist at Diageo. So just so that I understand, what does that role involve and how do you typically spend your time, if there is such a typically a thing is typically spending your time doing anything?
I think no day is typical, and that much is definitely the case. So I lead an amazing team of scientists, innovators, and individuals who have a total passion for governance. And this really means that I sort of span, I suppose, everything from really quite deep science in the science and technology area through to driving our innovation processes across our portfolio of brands and also innovations in the processes themselves, all the way through to actually looking at the best operating models, the best business propositions in order to be able to really drive sustainable margin growth for our organization. And then for me, I've always had a very strong passion for the sort of quality and the maintenance of very high standards. I think if you want to be best in class as an organization, you have to have extremely strong standards, and you really need to be able to articulate those really well across the business, but also to external stakeholders. So I think that my portfolio changes from time to time, but throughout all of that, science and sustainable practices in the making of world-class beverages is really what's driving the work that we do as a team.
And how do you bridge, or if there is a bridge, from lab onto kind of shelf in a bar or in a retail unit? What's the kind of, how do you cross that bridge? How do you make the science practical and applied? Does it start with the end product in mind, or does it start actually there's something we can tweak here and make better?
It always starts with the consumer, actually. If it comes to a product, you really need to be thinking about what it is that would really fascinate, intrigue, and inspire the consumer in order to come back and try that particular beverage again. So it really starts with that, but and that creates the aspiration, and then you really need to have some very strong multidisciplinary collaborations in order to bring that inspired innovation, inspired ideation that are done by teams in our marketing function through to actually realizing that full potential. And obviously there is kind of one component where you're really looking at how you do this in the laboratory and you bring to life the product on a very small scale, but then you have to scale it and operationalize it, essentially. And we actually go from the ideation all the way through to that realization of full scale, deployment, which is fantastic. And for me, I mean, we've had some great recent examples, including some of the work that we've done in Guinness, particularly in Guinness Zero, where actually the kind of the work that goes into creating those fantastic beers is an enormous amount of work, and there are lots of different people who are involved in that work. But when you see it be hugely successful, as both of those brands have been, then it's absolutely fantastic for us. It's a real privilege. And my favorite thing is if I am actually out somewhere with some friends and you overhear a conversation on the table next door, which is, I have just tried, have you tried that new whatever it might be that we've produced? And then the sense of pride that you have in that, and it's a shared pride across the organization, but it is quite something.
And with Diageo, the scale is significant, and the stake, can I say the stakes are high? Do you have the sleepless nights in terms of, have we got the process right? Or do you still have, as a marketeer, I've kind of launched products, and you always have that moment where you're thinking, are people going to go for it? Is it going to work? How do you handle the kind of those pressures, or how do you kind of work with the team to kind of keep focus on the controllables and follow the process, and we'll be fine?
So I think when an idea is inspiring, you start to believe, and that belief really pulls you through some of the scenarios where maybe something hasn't worked. I always think that it's mission critical, if you're on the edge of something really new and innovation, you are going to have some failures on the way. It looks very simple and easy when something is launched, but there's an awful lot of work that happens behind the scenes. And if you're being really innovative, then you will have some things that don't work, that never actually see the light of day. And that's absolutely a cornerstone of innovation. It's right that it works in that way. And I think for me, what I really, really love within Diageo is that I relate to the founders of some of our original very historic brands. So I'm always a huge admirer of Arthur Guinness and the real corporate prescience he had in creating a lease that was, extremely long and allowed for the growth of his brand, and the fantastic kind of thought that went in for Charles Tanqueray, or that the real kind of innovation that Johnny Walker actually has been from the Walker family. And I just find that heritage inspiring. And I always say to my team that, you know, they are creating the next Johnny Walkers, Guinnesses, and they will be remembered for that, because we have a fantastic archive heritage within Diageo. We actually have physical archives that hold all of our launches, for example. And so, yeah, I have some very talented people in my team, and I just know that they are creating the future.
And that sense, it's a really powerful idea, and it's something that we think about here at the IBD in terms of, and we'll come on to talk about that, how do we leave the IBD in a better place? How do we pass the baton on to the next person? What happened on your watch, I think, is a really powerful kind of driving thought. Now, you're a scientist, and as I think it's pretty common knowledge that we don't have enough scientists in the UK, certainly not working within industry. So what do you think the key challenges are to bring scientists into our industry? How do we start to solve that problem?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of attrition. So we do have a lot of scientists that go to universities in the UK, for example, and elsewhere in the world, who undertake courses, and really they start working in science because they have a real joy of learning and experimenting and really and innovating, I guess. And we need to do a lot more, I think, to stop the attrition of those very talented scientists into other sectors. Yeah. And that, for me, is mission critical, because it might not be other manufacturing sectors that they go to. It may well be that they decide that they want to join the legal profession, or they may actually want to switch, disciplines altogether. And I think it's incumbent on us to really show at the degree level, at the PhD level, that actually brewing and distilling is a place where you can go and you can be a very strong scientist, and you can make a real practical difference for the future, not just in producing very distinctive and fine beverages, but also in really starting to move the needle forward in sustainable manufacturing practice, for example, which other sectors can borrow from. So I do think that we probably have not really communicated how a career in brewing and distilling really would benefit wider science, would benefit sustainable practices, would benefit the communities in which we operate. And I think sometimes we forget that when you are in your first degree or you're doing a PhD, you want to be inspired. That's why you did those things in the first place. So,
I think the people that I've spoken to also within the industry, as I talk to people, they respect the scientists so much. There's such a level of respect for the kind of contribution that people are making that, as you say, is so mission critical. Now we've talked a bit about your work at Diageo, but I'm absolutely fascinated about the distillery that you founded with your husband, Chris, at the kind of the Surrey Copper Distillery. So if you could just give me a flavour of what was the inspiration behind doing that, because you've got a big career and what have you. So I know, I'll go and set up a distillery. So if you could give me the kind of the inspiration or the motivation behind setting up that business, I'd just be really interested.
So I don't think I would have ever have thought of setting up my own business had it not been for the acquisition of Sabmiller by AB InBev. And when that kind of a scenario happens, you do actually have to think about what your career might be in the future. And before change of control, I could see automatically that it would be very important to have some kind of differentiation as an individual, because I really wanted to continue to be a part of the sector. And I had created a number of different work streams for myself on what I might do in the future. And one of them was to return to academia, armed with the knowledge of a really fascinating corporate role that I had had with South Miller, and make a difference by developing talent in the area. And of course, I had an academic track record, so it was feasible to do that. The second was to actually see if I could join another corporate in the sector. And I thought it was very important to do the IBD Diploma in Distilling, because this broadened the potential kind of network that I could acquire, and therefore the potential opportunities. But it did occur as well at the same time that maybe one option would be to set up a family brewery or a distillery. And Chris and my husband and I kind of opted for distilling, and that because it all kind of fitted together with the fact that both he and I separately were actually studying distilling, the distilling diploma.
Chris is a brewer by trade, I think. So Chris is at Renegade and a brewer by trade, or
so his yeah. Sorry,
or have I got that wrong?
So Chris also has a PhD. He's actually a biotechnologist by original training, and and he had a number of stages to his career. He currently does work for a brewing company. Yes. So we decided that we would be setting up. We would set up the distillery, which felt like it was just such an obvious thing to do, but actually it's really hard to set up a company.
Anyone who sets up their own business, it's hard.
And I mean, you know, what was fantastic about it was that it was the entrepreneurship element of it. We suddenly were in a space where we could decide what still we wanted to have, and you know, and working with a supplier, actually make sure that we kind of had the kind of still that would create the flavors that we were most interested in, and then obviously create and launch brands. And you know, we set up a gin lab, and we just experimented with different flavors, and I absolutely adore history. So one of the kind of breakthroughs for me was in the National Brewing Library. There is a really fantastic collection of books, and I was aware that there was one of them by Ambrose Cooper, which is really quite an old book, and it was in the special collection part. It was really, you know, fantastically protected, and I'd gone to actually have a look at it and thought, you know, it'd be fantastic if we could actually recreate some of these recipes. And then I'd come back from a trip in London. I don't even know what meeting I'd gone to, but I was in a meeting in London, and I was on my way back, and I passed the British Library, and opposite there was a bookshop, and I thought, well, I'll just go in because I absolutely love books. And I went into this bookshop, and I was looking at all the Charles Dickens books, because I'm a huge fan of Charles Dickens. And along this kind of beautiful array of fantastically bound books, there was this one tiny book that was actually within the series and obviously out of place. Now, I looked at that and thought, well, I just need to take that out because that's not in the right place. And it was an Ambrose Cooper, The Complete Distiller. And I could not believe it. I just could not believe it. It was really surreal, obviously meant to be, really surreal. So I just kind of bought it there and then. And it, you know, I think it cost me £75. It was a huge sum. And just couldn't wait to get home and show Chris this book. And inside this book is a whole series of different recipes for all sorts of different original drinks from the late 1700s, and it's an amazing book. Yeah.
And so you recreated one of those
Yes.
recipes.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
when I was doing I absolutely love that story. That's the inspiration, but it gets better, doesn't it? In terms of when I was looking at the Surrey Copper Distillery website yesterday, I saw how the gin was called Copperfield, which obviously it's got a
Yes.
reference to the Charles Dickens novel.
Reference
And
Charles
the
Dickens.
packaging was beautiful in terms of it looks like a first edition, and I thought that's just I just think that's just inspired. And then what did you learn at Surrey Copper Distillery that you're now applying at Diageo, or were there other things that you'd learned in your corporate career that you applied when you were setting up as an entrepreneur?
So I think they are very different types of entities to work for. So if you're in a very small business that you've set up yourself, you're doing everything from the HMRC paperwork all the way through to cleaning the distillery, all the way through to ordering your botanicals, all the way through to delivering your final product to your customers. And it is so the time that you spend actually doing the experimentation, science, the distilling is actually quite small because you're doing all of the other components of it. So the positives of that is that you learn so much about the business, and you also understand that you will have lots of failures before you have your successes, and that's a really important kind of lesson to learn. But what I missed very much was that actually what really drives me and has always driven me is the focus on the science and using that to make businesses better and using that to make products better. And that for me has always been the driving force. And so therefore, we had always had the plan that once we'd set up the distillery, I would go on to either further my corporate or my academic career, and I would do one or the other. And it turned out I did both, but that's yeah, that's just me. So and so that was always the plan. And then obviously Chris continued with the distillery.
Brilliant. And then that leads me on quite nicely to your comment, that's just me, in terms of you've taken on a broad range of roles, recently elected as the kind of master of the Brewers Company. How do you make your choices, and how do you decide what to say yes to and what to say no to? What are the kind of things that you look for in a decision for you?
I really like to make a difference. I think that love of history that I have plays out in the form that I would really like to have a legacy. And the legacy is not necessarily about what I myself might have done, but whether or not individuals within my teams have fantastic careers. That for me is really important. I love to see them flourish. And really, I am so proud of the people that used to work in my laboratories when I was an academic. They're now leading academics at Heriot-Watt University or the University of Nottingham, or even I have postdocs who now are leading academics in VLB. And the same is true of all of my corporate teams, is that I've always been really proud of what they've gone on to do. So for me, I think the choices are maybe more simple than they might look from the outside. For me, it's just about actually doing something that will matter for the long term and will have an impact for the long term in a positive way on the careers and aspirations of others. That for me is really important. Right. And if I can achieve that in a career, I'm always going to try.
Oh, so that's really clear. And that sense of almost beginning with the end in mind in terms of where can we get to with this. And so I think that's great. And then, so you talk a lot about people there. So when you have a kind of broad range or you have a big responsibility. You have to deliver through others. What are the kind of things that you look for as a leader from your kind of reports? What are the things that you're looking for from your teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I'm actually recruiting someone, what I really look for is passion, and I look for that spark of a combination of ambition, but the real drive to collaborate with multidisciplinary teams. That for me is very important. I like individuals to be very self-driven, very self-aware. I always would aspire for them to be great networkers, people who can collaborate with lots of different people across organizations or between organizations is critical. But that they also pass that on in the sense that they help their teams to develop and to aspire for greater things, either in their careers or in the passions in which, a working life can take you. And I think that's really important. So, for me, those are the things. And I love diversity of thought.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very uninspiring world when you're sitting in a meeting and everybody is saying the same thing. What is really inspiring is when you have lots of different ideas, and it is really the assimilation of those into one bigger idea that really drives businesses forward properly.
Yeah, and I think that's such a powerful thought in terms of having somebody who's self-aware, authentic to themselves, driven within themselves, but driven to want to make a contribution within a broader team rather than looking to kind of make a contribution. Look at me, look at what I've done. It's like, what is the role that I can play by bringing my best self to the table within a team? And that must be absolutely critical in your roles.
It is. It's extremely important. None of us work alone in large organizations. And actually in a research lab, you don't work alone either. If you're a professor, it is your students and your collaborators who really, by working together with them, you form these fantastic kind of legacies of findings that help power science on. So I think it's always been there, actually.
And that sense of welcoming diversity, equity, and inclusivity, so that everybody has a contribution to make. What do you think? You've been you've had some significant first roles for women within your career. What do you think? What can we all do more of to kind of encourage that diversity, equity, and inclusivity within the industry?
I think there's a number of things that we can do. I mean, the first thing is that I often wonder why it is I'm the first, but if I really reflect on it, I can see it. It's that when I first started in the industry, there were not many women who had roles either in the science space or in the production side of brewing or distilling. There just weren't many women. So by making sure that you encourage individuals who probably previously might not have aspired to those kinds of role, by making sure that you encourage and show possibility, you're actually opening up the avenues to thinking that these roles might be attainable. And the reality of the situation is that a lot of these roles are about volunteering for organizations. They're actually, that they're not about a role for which you're paid. They're about making a contribution above and beyond your normal working life for the betterment of the sector as a whole. And that is also quite important. I guess I must be a serial volunteer.
Yeah, and I think the IBD is very lucky in terms of the volunteers that we have had who want to kind of take on roles and we're blessed with a kind of, I think the IBD's strength of the IBD is its network, and we are blessed for the diversity within that network. So I think that's really good. And from an IBD perspective, you've been on a journey with the IBD. Obviously, you've done your diploma, you've been president, you've done lots of. How did that come about? Was that and how has that supported you within your career?
Yeah, so I joined the IBD about 1990, something like that.
Yeah.
And I first had a role with the IBD in the research committee, and I was invited by so I'm going back a very long way now, because it was called the research committee at that time. And the research committee had Charlie Bamforth and Paul Hegarty within its ranks, and they invited me to be a member of the research committee. I was just out of my PhD at that point, so I'd attended meetings, but I had never actually had to take on work programs on behalf of a committee before, and neither had I, because I ultimately chaired that committee, neither had I ever chaired a committee before. My whole working life is about chairing meetings, and in the Worshipful Company of Brewers, I obviously now chair the court of the Worshipful Company as master, and as president, obviously, of the IBD, I was chairing a number of meetings. So that first chairmanship of that research committee was really quite critical, because it taught me how to chair meetings and about what looked like a good set of minutes and what might not, and how to really manage that process.
And the differences,
really important,
I guess, between an executive role and a kind of non-executive role in terms of strategic direction, making sure that the right priorities are being focused on it. It's a different skill set, isn't it?
It is a different skill set. And as well, I suppose at the time, I was really very new into working life. I was super early career. So I was watching others and the way that they did things, and I learned from the best, essentially, during that period of time. The other thing the IBD did for me, so then I progressed on to being chairman of the international section, which really was about making sure that you networked across multiple countries and put lots of different points of view across, so the assimilation of different ideas and pulling that together into a cohesive theme that could be discussed at the council, for example.
Yeah.
And then I was chairman of the Midlands section, and that started to then involve public speaking. Now, I'd been public speaking for a while at this point, in the sense that I'd been to various conferences and presented scientific papers, but there is a difference between doing that and giving a speech, be it about recognition, be it about talking about the history of an organization for which you're not employed, and really starting to represent, a kind of collective view from a membership organization. So doing those speeches was actually really new to me. I mean, I do those quite a lot, obviously, at the moment, particularly, but I do those quite a lot. And that was where I first started. And, the conferences were really material as well, because I was being exposed to different geographies around the world, and the IBD African section and Asia Pacific conferences, and then later on the Distilling conferences. You were meeting peers from across the world, and you were able to then hear other people's ideas, thoughts, but also to really network. I mean, I do definitely think the IBD provided me with a phenomenal network, and that, that sort of, I suppose, was enhanced by my academic career and some of the other societies that I belong to, some of them microbiological, some of them brewing, but it was my network there.
Well, was there a particular event or or time when you thought, yeah, this is the IBD at its best? This is what the IBD should look and feel like. Is there a kind of moment that you kind of look back on, or where you think, yeah, this is?
I think there are a number, actually. I mean, I was always deeply impressed by the way in which the IBD tried to be super inclusive in various parts of the world to individuals who might not normally have had the opportunity to attend conferences. I was super proud of the travel scholarships that were created, particularly by the Africa section, actually, which enabled individuals to travel to the convention and meet, in some cases, some of the individuals who'd written books in their field. And I mean, I can remember meeting people who would be in awe of watching these speakers and then get to meet them and talk to them and understand that, no, actually, they might have been a name in a book, but they were real people, and they were as interested in what they were doing as they were, about talking about
and they all want to play it forward.
Yes, and I think the pay it forward is really important, and so I always thought that was fantastic. And I mean, obviously, the founding of the National Brewing Library was another. Because the reality of that was it was a collaboration between myself and Oxford Brookes and the Institute of Brewing and Distilling, and Tom Martin and Chris Marchbanks in particular, who should, and I'm sure they always will be, very proud of what they achieved with that, because that is a collection which is very rare. So these are things which you can't replicate. But I've been very lucky. I've been to a number of the different IBD conferences, and I can honestly say that I have the most amazing memories of them, watching leaders speak, being able to present myself and get feedback, networking with people, and enjoying the camaraderie that our sector has, which is actually rarer than you think. It is quite rare.
So. Yes, I think it's rare, and I think it's very special that the IBD represents this fellowship of like-minded innovators, scientists, business people who are, have that kind of sense of how do we help to share, how do we help to solve shared problems, and what have you. And in your role, Katherine, you're very much at the forefront of innovation and making sure that what happens, what the industry is up to is or what your companies are up to is relevant to the kind of needs of the market. How does the IBD need to adapt to the changes that you're seeing? How do we ensure that we stay relevant as we move forward into the CIBD? What should be on the board's kind of watching brief?
So for me, one of the real strengths, and I've always felt that it was actually a USP for the IBD, is the qualifications. They are absolutely critical. There are obviously university qualifications in brewing and distilling. Heriot Wotton, Nottingham, and UC Davis and other organizations around the world do that. But it is about continuing professional development, which in this particular case is about guiding someone through their developmental capability journey in the technical space. That's a very unique thing that the Institute does. And it's really important. If I even just kind of think for a minute about undertaking the diploma, I was not early career when I did that. But it did actually help me to change direction, utilize not just my previous track record on my career, but also build a whole new kind of, I suppose, element to my portfolio, which has proven to be invaluable. So for me, that capacity to be able to provide learning for the sector is really important. I think the second thing is, it's easy to kind of underestimate this, but the conferences themselves are also super important. They are a means for networking face to face, which we are not, we were not focusing on as much as we used to, because we obviously have wonderful tools that enable us to talk at distance virtually. But it is really, really important that there are those opportunities where individuals can share their research and gain feedback and good conversation and discussion about it. And it's much easier to do that face to face than it is to do that virtually. And then I think the IBD has the opportunity to expand its portfolio of training and development and examinations. And there are providers who provide these opportunities in lots of different areas. But I think what's really critical is for the IBD to continue to connect with industry leaders, so that there is that strong dialogue about where we see the capability needs for the future really are. Yeah. There is nothing more important in a large organization like ours than acquiring, engaging, maintaining and developing our talent. That is everything. If we don't do that, then we won't be building the right teams for the future.
Wow. So Katherine, that's given me certainly plenty of food for thought, and thank you very much. And just to kind of wrap up, because I'd just like to thank you for being so generous with your time and so kind of providing such kind of great insight and considered thought and answers. So thank you so much for your time, Katherine, and look forward to seeing you a lot in the future in your role as the kind of master of the company of brewers. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you everyone else for listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.